Hello and welcome, folks. We are excited to have you all join us today for this Women Deliver Global Dialogues event around catalyzing gender smart AI. We're going to get started in just 1 minute. Thanks. Okay, I'm going to kick us off. Again, welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here with us in this virtual event today. We're really excited to be hosting with Branch this Women Deliver Global Dialogues session on gender smart artificial intelligence. My name is Genevieve Smith. I am the Associate Director at the Center for Equity, Gender, and Leadership at UC Berkeley School of Business. And for those that don't know a little bit about our center, Egal for short, we seek to reimagine business for a more equitable and inclusive society. So in addition to educational support, student courses, and campus events, we also advance research and work in the space of equity and inclusion in business and have various projects and initiatives with industry to investigate and advance equity and inclusion in business and artificial intelligence in particular. So I'm really excited to have you all here with us today and to be sharing this event with the great organization Branch. So today, what we're really kind of asking and curious about is how can we build gender smart artificial intelligence that advances gender equity as opposed to embeds and scales gender bias? What does this look like? And the session today, we're going to kind of kick off with a little bit of a brain teaser around this from my colleague Ishita. And then we're going to turn it over to Rose Maturi from Branch, who's going to share a little bit more about the work that they do. And then we'll have a fireside chat, really delving into some of these questions and topics around gender smart AI. So with that, let me turn it over to my wonderful colleague, Ishita Rustagi, who is a senior analyst here at Egal, who's going to share a little bit more to get us going. Ishita, over to you.
Thank you so much, Genevieve, for that introduction. I'm excited to dive right into the content. Okay, so just a little bit of background before we dive into gender smart AI. When we talk about AI today, we'll be focusing on AI systems that use machine learning, or ML, which is where a series of algorithms takes and learns from massive amounts of data to find patterns and make predictions. And these are the systems that we see proliferating across industries, not just in large tech companies, but also throughout the startup ecosystem. These are the systems that are informing, for instance, how much credit a financial institution might offer a different customer, or who is being prioritized for some sort of medication in a hospital, who is being called in for a job interview, who is being admitted to university, and so many other things. So really, AI has incredible potential to make decisions more efficient, more cost-effective, and therefore to promote productivity and growth in the economy. And we also find that the use of AI in these decision-making processes can actually reduce human subjectivity. We're seeing an uptick in tools and resources being developed that use AI to actually advance things like gender equality. So just a couple of examples here. To the left, you see a screenshot about a tool called Spell Check for Bias, which was launched by the Gina Davis Institute on Gender in Media, which basically analyzes scripts while they're in pre-production to check for, stereotypes, biases, and tropes about marginalized communities, and just provide more of an opportunity for better representation. And to the right, you'll see a screenshot from Trial Watch, which is by the Clooney Foundation for Justice and Microsoft's AI for Good initiative, which monitors trials globally to gauge what the injustices are and to rally support for folks whose rights might have been violated in the criminal justice process. So this program, it has folks use an AI-enabled app to capture audio, photos, and questionnaires during trials, and makes this information comparable and looks at what the trends are as well. So clearly there is immense potential for good. But on the flip side, AI can also embed biases, it can produce discriminatory outputs at scale, and really pose immense risks to individuals, businesses, and society. So the goal there is to make sure we're unlocking the value of AI in a way that's responsible and equitable. And before we delve into what that could look like, I think it's important to understand the problem space in which we're operating, which is why and how are AI systems biased? So at a high level, really AI systems are biased because they're human creations. They are classification technologies that are a product of the context in which they're created. In a lot of cases, they really replicate society. And since we live in a society where bias and inequality exists, it doesn't really come as a surprise then that bias and inequality can be present in AI. It's important to consider specifically who is making leadership decisions and who is present in the room and developing these AI systems, because ultimately it's their perspectives, their lived experiences and knowledge that's being integrated into the technology. And the reality is that the folks in that room often tend to look like the folks in the picture you see on screen. Most large-scale AI systems tend to be developed in just a handful of institutions and labs in the West, and these are spaces that tend to be majority white, affluent, and male. And we can see here that there are large racial and gender gaps in the space of AI. When we think about it at a more granular level, and you start to think about, okay, so how did these biases show up and manifest in AI? There are several spaces in the process of developing and using an AI system that bias can creep in. And I'm just going to share a really quick overview of this bias in AI map that we here at Egal have developed. So let's start with data sets. That's a really, really important component because that's basically what AI systems are learning from. These are really critical. And data is often assumed to accurately reflect society, but there are actually significant data gaps. So there's very little to no data coming from some communities. And even the data that we do have often tends to be rife with racial, economic, and gender biases, because ultimately it is humans who are deciding what, where, and how data is collected and organized. And here's what this means. For instance, data sets that are used for facial recognition technology have been found to overrepresent people who are white and male. And therefore, it stands to reason that this tech tends to be far more accurate for white men than, say, for white women. So clearly, using biased data sets would result in a biased algorithm, but that's not the only way. Bias can actually creep in at several different points. So like when you're defining the purpose of an AI model, when you're selecting what proxies and variables it should learn from, as well as how it's being evaluated. So the example here, you'll see the Apple Card was actually found to be offering smaller credit lines to women than to men, even when they had similar credit scores. And the company did claim that its algorithm was gender blind, but even a gender blind algorithm can end up being biased against women as long as it's drawing on any sort of inputs that happen to correlate with gender. And we will dive into this more later in the presentation as well. And finally, how AI is used matters as well. If an AI system is being used in a different context or for a different population for which it was developed, or if it can also be altered in ways that are discriminatory for certain populations. So obviously, biased AI can have immense impacts on the health, safety, and well-beings of individuals in society. You can see here that there are a large number of impacts that can have on individuals in society. And when we're thinking specifically about gender-biased AI, we at Egal actually conducted an analysis of around 133 biased AI systems across industries. And you can see more at that QR code that's on the screen, as well as at a resource that we'll share with you later. But just to give you a high-level understanding, we found that about 44% of these systems demonstrated gender bias, and the most common impact related to gender was providing lower quality of service and unfair resource and opportunity allocation, followed by evidence of all of the other types of harm that you see on screen here. So clearly, tackling bias in AI, first and foremost, is the right thing to do. But for business leaders, it's also the smart thing to do. We have actually found in our research that companies that effectively mitigate bias in AI are mitigating risk, maintaining a stronger brand reputation, having a superior value proposition, staying ahead of legislation that's definitely coming down the pipeline, and are more able to be a competitive leader in this fast-paced industry. So given all of this context, it's really important to consider what can business leaders do to, mitigate gender bias in AI. And for that, I will turn it back to Genevieve to share some of the strategies.
Great, thanks, Ishita. And so, some of our different research, we've looked at kind of recommendations, related to mitigating bias in AI, but also generally how to embed responsible AI approaches in organizations and also in kind of startups and different types of entities. So building from our research and project work streams on responsible AI, there's a couple of things that we wanted to highlight here. So some good strategies are thinking about responsible and ethical AI principles. So these are principles that the organization can use to govern different stages of AI research, development, and management. They can inform new strategies and initiatives, impact employee behavior, and result in adoption of new internal governance approaches like review processes. They can also provide assurances to the public, customers, and investors. So a couple of different common principles tend to be things like fairness and justice, transparency, privacy, and responsibility. And then making sure to communicate these. And then secondly is around diverse teams and inputs, kind of building from what Ishita said before, the who that develops these technologies really matters. So from the get-go, prioritizing building a diverse and inclusive team and making sure to incorporate input and perspectives of end users in AI development. And then updating expectations and performance assessments. So how can we embed responsibility as a priority in all different processes, teams, and management levels? And really, again, making sure to communicate those across the organization and linking those to incentives like promotion and pay. So one strategy is thinking about updating performance review processes to include reflection around how individuals have done related to these responsible and AI principles. And having teams think about how to operationalize them, like through different processes or tools, such as ensuring transparency and data set development, or model development, such as using tools like data sheets for data sets or data nutrition labels that capture what's in data sets, different decisions that are being made, and more. And then learning and development. So having onboarding workshops on these topics, including an overview of the organization's kind of principles and expectations, and doing different regular trainings on topics of responsible AI, like understanding fairness and different kind of technical and non-technical approaches that can be used. So what about adding a gender lens on all of this? So how do we think about this when we're thinking about gender smart AI in particular? So when it comes to responsible and ethical AI principles, really thinking about gender diversity and AI governance, whether boards or other leadership. And then within the principles themselves, thinking critically about how to incorporate justice and equity related to gender. So like making sure that principles related to fairness incorporate gender in addition to other minoritized and marginalized identities. And then when it comes to teams, ensuring gender diversity is represented. There was a recent study that showed that diverse demographic groups are better at decreasing algorithmic bias. And so kind of taking action here by ensuring that diversity is the core leadership priority and updating kind of policies and practices to reflect this can be really important. And then centering the voices of women and non-binary individuals and end users in development of AI systems is really key. So we can look to other sectors like off-grid energy and clean cooking sectors that have embedded kind of participatory design approaches in building and developing different technologies. And when it comes to updated expectations, thinking about different tools to operationalize AI principles and approaches. So in addition to kind of documenting what's in machine learning data sets and models, assessing those data sets for underrepresentation of different gender identities, and thinking about underlying inequities that might be reflected in that data. So making sure here not to only rely on technical tools like assessing fairness that can miss how data can reflect certain power structures and historical inequality that can become reinforced in machine learning models. So really thinking critically about what fairness metrics we might be optimizing for in these machine learning tools, and how a status quo of gender inequality might be reinforced. So just kind of thinking critically about these things. And then consider partnering with gender experts to tackle some of these different questions and topics. And within learning and development, having different gender examples in some of these workshops. So these are just a couple of kind of quick, this is a bit of a teaser as we think about gender smart AI and as we think about where we want to kind of move as a space and how we can think critically about some of these different topics. So I'm really excited now to bring Rose Maturi up to the screen. Rose is the Managing Director of East Africa at Branch and a leader within the development financial service industry, who's really been pushing for inclusive finance and thinking about AI and machine learning in this space. So we're thrilled to have Branch as a partner here, and I'm excited to pass it over to Rose to introduce more about the work that Branch does before delving into our fireside chat. Over to you, Rose.
Thank you, Genevieve, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for hosting Branch. So I'm Rose Maturi. I look after Branch. I'm the MD for East Africa. So we do exist in a couple of markets. I'll take you through who is Branch, what do we do, why is this important, especially for this conversation that we're having. So, and it's a very important topic, especially now when you're looking at artificial intelligence and the fact that everyone is moving into more automated solutions. Everyone is looking at how can you be more inclusive using technologies. So very quickly, who we are. So before we get into why Branch, why do we do what we do? So essentially, we were looking at what is the most ubiquitous tool that we have in the market today or on the planet today as we speak. So the cell phone is one of the tools that actually revolutionized how we live, how we work, how we do our financial transactions and so on. So we actually saw an opportunity, especially with the fact that we have a lot of smartphones that are now being used across the globe. And we were specifically looking at the developing markets. So from the data that you're looking at on the screen, the projections there, looking at where will we be by the year 2025. So we may remember that when phones were starting out, no one actually was imagining that we would have smartphones doing as many things that they are today. And that became one of the most important tools for us as Branch to use to reach out to as many people as possible in the markets that we're in. And I'll take you through how we were using both artificial intelligence and machine learning to actually push for more financial inclusion and also ensure that we have more women that we can be able to reach with our financial services. So the massive opportunity that we were looking at, we decided to focus on Africa and India as the markets that we're in. So today, we do have operations in 4 markets, but we actually had done lots of research on how is the population in the Middle East, how is the population in Sub-Saharan Africa, what type of infrastructure exists in those markets, how is it in India, what infrastructure do they have, how is the regulation in these markets? Because we said when we launch, we need to make our platform as easy as possible to move from one market to the next. So with that context in mind, so here is where Branch comes in. Branch is a startup, if I can put it that way. We're just 8 years old. We are headquartered in Silicon Valley, so that's where the head office is. And we currently have operations in 4 markets. So Kenya was the first one where we launched our operations, and we decided to venture into East Africa. So Tanzania became the second market. Then we also are looking at West Africa, and then we ventured out into India. We also did have operations in South America. We had Mexico as one of the markets, but based on the data that we were getting, based on how the performance was, we decided to put Mexico on hold. So part of the strategy as well is to still continue expanding into various markets in Africa specifically, because we do have an agenda to become a Pan-African digital bank. So a bit of the statistics that we have done so far. We have over $700 million in loans that we have been able to originate. And we also have over 4 million borrowers, but I'll give you the context because right now, with the agenda of becoming a Pan-African digital bank, there are more products that we are offering, but the hook product was the loans. Then we also have a solid set of investors, which include Visa and Reason and IFC. And we are actually excited about this because especially the due diligence that was done on Branch as a company and the fact that these investors saw that we were really intentional about financial inclusion. We were intentional about ensuring that we were able to provide credit to customers or individuals who originally were not able to access any form of financing. We've been able to reach to the numbers that I've shown you on the screen. So we are essentially a credit-led neobank. So the intention here becomes, how do we tap into a market? So we start with a credit product, then get into other financial services. Again, the mobile phone being the tool that we use. So the whole bank exists on the mobile phone. We do not have any physical branch presence. And then depending on the market that we're in, it depends on what is the most prevalent use in terms of financial transactions. So if you look at East Africa, it's more of mobile money. So a lot of the products that we are offering will be done through mobile money. If you go to West Africa, it's more of a card market. So we do have a debit card in that market. If you go to India, it's a mix of both. So we do a lot of research to see what exactly do our customers need once they get into starting to bank, let me say bank with Branch. Let's say we give them their first credit. How exactly can they now be able to do other financial transactions? So the playbook, according to how Branch works, ordinarily in any market that we go to, we will launch using a lending product. We believe, especially when you look at the developing markets that we tap into, ensuring that the customers have access to credit is the first step in which we can be able to attract users in order to provide them with more financial services. And how are we able to do that? The markets that we are working in today, we ordinarily look at what type of data can we be able to access. So if I can give the context of, say, East Africa as an example, we actually started the business more than 8 years ago. By the time we were starting issuing the loans to our customers, the credit market had around 4 million out of a total population of, say, we are 53 million in total population for Kenya as an example. Then the adult population, you're talking about 30 million. Only 4 million Kenyans had access to credit. And this is because of the way the process was being done. You needed to have either collateral. So if you look at collateral, so for instance, you're looking at, say, a vehicle as collateral. You're looking at a title deed for property. You're looking at chattels to property as well. Or the other thing that was being used as well would be maybe you have investments like your fixed deposits and any other form of cash investment. So banks ordinarily would use that as collateral. So the one thing in and of itself for Kenya as a market, by just asking customers to provide such collateral, it just meant ordinarily you would not get women coming to apply for facilities, because property, according to the culture that we have, especially in East Africa, belongs to the family. And when you say belongs to the family, it will be the head of the family, which is the male. And those are just cultural nuances that we need to pay attention to depending on the market. So a lot of these facilities or loans would be given to the men. And when we looked at financial inclusion, that time it was less than 20%. And there was a huge gap. So by the time we started doing our own lending, where we said, we will use the mobile phone, we will create algorithms and use our artificial intelligence and machine learning to be able to see is someone able to actually qualify for a facility and start them with a very small loan, we can be able to increase that bracket. And the good thing about that was it doesn't matter who has the handset, whether whichever gender, it doesn't matter. So we just look at the behavior patterns that you have on the handset, and we can be able to give you a facility. So we're happy to say that 8 years later, if you look at Kenya and Tanzania as examples, I'll keep using East Africa because that's the context and the market that I look after. So if you look at the financial penetration, so for Kenya, we're now talking about more than 85% financial inclusion, purely because of mobile money and how it has really been entrenched in the society. And from that, if you look at now the lending that we've been able to provide collectively, Branch and many other players, we have more than 25 million Kenyans who have been able to access a form of credit. So I think that's been exciting. And in our database, we actually have close to 40% of the borrowers being women, which we believe is a very, very exciting number, because when we began, it was at less than 10%, but slowly we've seen that people have been able to access the facilities regardless of gender, and that's purely based on how our AI has been structured. So the next thing that we've done once we launch a lending product is start layering and providing more details in terms of how can a customer be able to do more transactions with the facilities we're giving them. And that essentially means getting entrenched into the regulations, going to the relevant regulators in that country and seeking approval to now start, say, taking deposits, offering savings products and things like that. And then from there, we're now able to become a fully fledged digital bank. So we've done that in Kenya. The process is almost done in Nigeria and also Tanzania and India. So like pretty much what I've mentioned. So the first advantage that we have as Branch is, and we normally call it the Branch flywheel. Anytime we're launching into a new country, we look at what is the best way to acquire customers. That's through lending. And how are you able to do the lending? You look at what data will be available through the handsets that the customers are using. Some of the countries that we operate in have very strict data protection laws, so we have to comply with that, and we're happy to be data controllers in some of these markets. And with that data, we're able to provide loan facilities all the way up to, in some markets, we can do up to $10,000. In some markets, we're doing up to $3,000 non-collateral, and they're instant. So we're able to fulfill the needs immediately. And then from there, look at the lifetime value of that customer. How can we be able to provide more services? And it's upwards from that particular time. The next advantage that I have mentioned briefly is, in order to have that longevity, customers have already started working with us. They are happy that we are able to provide them loans without any collateral. The next part becomes, how do we ensure that we now provide them with more services? And essentially, that's how we've been able to register as microfinance banks in the various markets that we're in. And we shall continue with the expansion through the process I've shown you. So the mission continues to be delivering world-class financial services to the mobile generation, and ensuring part of the vision is providing full service digital banking in the emerging markets. So it's a very strategic intention that we have. So for all the markets that we're in, we will continue to work purely on the phone and look at how does the regulation embrace this so that we can be able to provide our customers with the services that they need. And this is just a laundry list of some of the things we've been able to do. We started as a pure digital lending company, issuing instant loans through our AI and machine learning-led efforts. From there, we've now been able to offer low-cost transfers, so you can do peer-to-peer transfers. We give very good yields on our investments for the customers who keep their money with us. We enable them to do bill payments. So pretty much just following through their lifestyle and meeting them at their point of need. Also ensuring we do merchant payments, and in some countries, we also have debit cards. So what's been interesting is to see how has this morphed through the time. When we started 100% loan only, and now if you look at this chart, we're saying 60% are still doing the loan only, because in some markets, we're still purely a lending company, while in other markets, we also offer other products. So we're very excited to see that people are becoming, or rather using more than one product in our institution. And of course, that now enables us to still continue using our machine learning to see how do we develop more targeted messages, more targeted products to these particular users. And one of the best things that we've also seen as well, and this has been very important to us as a business, when we lend to our customers, because offering the loans still remains to be the core function of what we do, the customers use the funds to either start or to grow a business. So you can look at it as, if 66% of our customer base is using it for business purposes, remember as well, we also have 40% of our base being women. So we are enabling the women, as an example, because of the discussion today, to be able to run the businesses, to be able to stock their shops, to be able to have the working capital that they need to work. And it's always mentioned, and it's also proven in the data that we have. We've seen that they are better repairs, but nonetheless, we don't use gender when it comes to how do we create a credit score for that individual. But from the data we consume, because we have to do reports to various regulators, we have to show them gender-based data. And the insights from that have actually been very exciting. So that's in a nutshell what we do as Branch. And just a very quick summary on how we apply our artificial intelligence. So again, our bank, so to say, is available on Android at the moment. So we will look at various data sets, which I'm showing on the screen. So for instance, the location data. We'll look at commercial SMSs. So in Africa, actually, SMSs are used a lot by different companies to either send reminders to their users or to send new offers. We hardly text each other as part of conversation, because we have WhatsApp as a tool that has taken over the social aspect of it. So the commercial side is being used as part of the SMSs, and it gives us very rich information. Which companies have you subscribed to? What services are you using? We also have plugged into credit bureau data in some in some countries as well. We don't use it critically in terms of giving out our loans, because we know how the penetration of the credit bureaus in Africa, it's quite low in some markets. So it may actually work negatively towards the efforts that we're putting in. We look at repayment history. Again, this comes in through the SMSs that you get. We also have the social media that someone is using, but all of this is actually through consent that the customer has given us to be able to access this information. So with this type of data, we're able to be agnostic towards whom exactly are we giving the finances to, and do they qualify? Yes, they do. And that being said, we are able to provide the loans to our customers. So in the next discussion, I'll be able to speak about how exactly do we ensure that we eliminate biases, what are the learnings that we've had through the process. But in a nutshell, that's what we do as Branch. And thank you for the opportunity. So I'll invite Genevieve to take us through the next session.
Great. Thank you so much, Rose. Really appreciate learning more about Branch, and I'm excited to ask a couple questions here. So as folks are kind of hearing some of these different things coming in, please do populate the Q&A with any questions that you have. And I'm just going to kick us off with a couple of questions to Rose to get going. So I'm curious, Rose, super interesting to hear about some of the impacts that Branch is having. Maybe can you share a little bit more around, what are some of the impacts that you're seeing that Branch is having when it comes to kind of women's empowerment and gender, and how do you see some of these impacts varying in different countries? So you mentioned that about 40% of your customers are women. How does that vary in different countries? And what are you kind of measuring or seeing around some of these different impacts? Oh, I think you're muted.
Apologies for that. Again, please give me or allow me to give the context of East Africa, where I can be able to actually delve into more details. So going back to the question, I think what I can mention is up until, say, the late 1980s, for women in East Africa, it was impossible literally to open a bank account. You had to be accompanied by either your, say, parent or father, mostly, or your spouse, in order for you to actually open a bank account, or you haven't even gotten to the level of being able to apply for a loan. So some of these things started changing, especially when the cell phones came into play. So we're talking about in Kenya specifically, mobile money was actually launched in 1999. So when that came in, there was a whole training across the country where people were being shown, hey, you can actually be able to move money around using your cell phone. And by so doing, you don't necessarily have to be close to a banking hall or to be to be formally banked. And that, I guess, created this light bulb moment for a lot of the fintechs. So what happened is you'll find, based on the data, I have some data from IMF, it indicated that in sub-Saharan Africa, only 37% of women had a bank account as late as 2017. So the difference here being, and at that point in time, we also are looking at 48% of men having a bank account. So that was in 2017, and a lot of efforts were done, especially during the COVID period, where a lot of sensitization was done. You need to be able to do your financial transactions using digital platforms. You need to be able to access basic services using digital platforms. So when that actually was being pushed, you'll find the numbers actually, how will I put it, actually just shot up in terms of people accessing services using their mobile phones, or rather embracing and trusting the fact that you can actually be able to access financial services using your mobile phone. So looking at the fact that it was 48% of men, 37% of women, in total, financial inclusion in East Africa, we were talking, I think I mentioned this earlier, we were talking at less than 20%, that's in the early 2000s, but that now leapfrogged to more than 80% being included. So right now we're seeing with that type of number of financial inclusion, so the number of women, especially like I mentioned for Branch, we're pushing towards 40. In the banking sector in general is still lower. We're talking about 25 going to 30%, but I think it's something that will keep on increasing.
Yeah, super interesting, and definitely, exciting to see how different types of ways to assess creditworthiness that aren't necessarily just thinking about collateral and these other things that women have been locked out of more traditionally to can be utilized to kind of enhance access to finance. And so that's super exciting. And I'm curious, some of the things we talked about kind of earlier and some of the things that we've seen, different ways that bias can enter into AI tools and machine learning tools, some of which has to do with like over underrepresentation in the data that can make tools maybe work less well for different populations, or kind of might reflect different like historical inequities. How do you kind of grapple with some of these challenges, some of these different potential biases? And maybe just to layer in other questions, like what do you think kind of like gender smart AI like looks like and means in the context of the work that Branch does?
Great. So I think pretty much to say the challenges that we literally have faced, especially when it comes to AI, naturally, when you look at data, we had instances of insufficient or low quality data, especially when we're starting out, because the quality of cell phones, if you look at 8 years ago versus now, lots of enhancements have been done. So when we were starting out, it actually took quite a bit of time in order for us to be able to build algorithms that were making, that were actually, we were able to use them. So that took us close to a year plus. So the AI systems, the way they were functioning, how were we going to train them? Was the data set relevant? So it was quite a learning curve. Then there was also the issue of being able to integrate into existing systems. Remember, this is a financial service. You need to know, is this person who they are? So in some of the countries, we were able to integrate to the, say, population registry system, where you can be able to check, is the ID documentation the same as what the person is actually saying they have. And in some countries that was not existent. So you would get varying types of identity documents being provided. And that again would also make the data not as stable as we wanted to. Another huge challenge was, again, the AI talent. So this being something new at that particular time, lots of the teams that we were working with were pretty much from the US, and the cultural norms, the data being more structured, say, for instance, in the US versus in some of the countries that, or some of the markets in Africa, how do you enable them to understand especially the SMS data? We actually had quite a tough time in Tanzania because they also speak a completely different language. Their money language is Swahili. In Kenya, pretty much it's English. So how do you enable the AI team to understand the SMSs that they're going through? And also the systems that we're working with, much as they're robust, how much data can they be able to crunch? So part of what we did in terms of solving, and because we really understood that this is important to us, we had to make sure that as part of the team from the beginning, we had a team that does user research. It's one of the core functions that we have in branch. Every market has an in-country based user researcher. And this is someone who would get raw data from people, from talking to them, from recording these conversations through consent, so that by the time the team groups together and they're working through building the algorithms, they also get to understand what is the background of this type of information. The other thing that we were also able to do, and we continuously keep doing, is reviewing the training data. So in the beginning, it would take us quite a bit of time to review, but now we've gotten into a more regular cadence. So you look at the data that's going in, for how long will we test this, which is the test group, which is the control group, and how do we actually look at the output of that information. So part of what is very exciting about the branch culture is we have a very diverse culture. And when we are talking about the output of maybe it's a new credit model where we were using the AI, we will have diverse people attending that meeting. It's actually open to everyone. You can join as and when you wish to join, but there are some members who must attend that particular discussion, and they come from all the different markets. So we sit, we listen in, we ask as many questions as possible, just to ensure that we are eliminating as much bias as we can before that particular model is rolled out. And then we also maintain a quality assurance on everything that we do. So there's a team that will come in, check whatever we actually rolled out, is it working the way it was supposed to work? So now we're happy that we pretty much do it quite quickly, quite seamlessly, but it was based on the learnings that we had for over the 8 years that we've been in business.
Yeah, super interesting. It makes me think of a couple different kind of follow-up questions as you're talking. And I want to remind folks to put any questions that they have, use the Q&A function. We'll be kind of turning over to audience questions soon. So definitely pop anything that's on your mind in that Q&A. But yeah, so kind of building off what you were just talking about. So, really interesting that you mentioned that in the different markets, you kind of have this user research. And that's definitely something that we found to be really important, is making sure to kind of, incorporate obviously the, end users' perspectives into AI development and thinking about these different things. And also making sure to kind of center women's voices. I'm curious if you can share a little bit more around, for some of that like user research, how are you making sure to incorporate kind of women's voices? What are some challenges to doing so, especially in some of these different markets that you're operating in? And are you finding like what kind of, you finding good like gender differences in some of that user research that kind of informs your approach? Maybe if you could just share a little bit more around that.
That's actually a very good question, because you find the women sometimes tend to be more shy when you tell them, hey, could we ask you a few questions? We also have this thing where sometimes you find the users will feel, hey, if I say something bad, are you going to deny me a loan next time? So they tend to give you a lot of very nice information about Branch, as opposed to, tell us as it is. Are you happy? Are you not? Does this make sense? Does it not? So what we've done over the years is to, first of all, diversify the way we do the user research. So of course, we'll have the focus groups and try to get as much information as possible. On the other hand, we do what you call a day in the life. So we will go to where the customer is, sit with them through the day, tell them, hey, carry on with your day. We just want to see how you're planning out your day, how you're dealing with your customers. We'll ask you questions as we go along. We normally compensate them for the time, because it's the honorable thing to do, because we are interrupting their schedule. And of course, we tell them in advance that this is what we shall be doing, and try as much as possible to help them understand that the feedback they're giving us is going to help us to make the platform even better for them. So when we were starting out, it was a bit tough, because a lot of, especially the women, were very skeptical about it. But now we found, even when it comes to the responses, they're more dependable. They'll keep their appointments even better than the men do. The men will get excited without, again, any bias. They'll tell you, hey, I'm going to be there, I'll show up. But we've learned that we have to book like 3 people at the same time, because 2 of them will end up not showing up. So, but that being said, even in the interview process, we have, yes, the user researcher is there, but we also encourage the team, especially from our customer success, to attend 1 or 2 people to also attend their sessions with them, so that they get to understand and also ask the questions in a different shape, in a different format, because they do see the questions from a customer success perspective. So that has actually helped us to get very good feedback from our users.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So we have a question from Teresa. Teresa's curious, what have your default and loss rates been, and how do you prevent moral hazard when there may not be shared credit systems such that defaults may or may not impact future access to credit? So when there's little or no default when you first enter a market, how do you train your AI models? So some couple good questions in there. So yeah, kind of default and loss rates, thinking about moral hazard, and yeah, how do you train your models when there's perhaps not, kind of the little to no default data to use to train the model? So yeah, curious if you can share a little bit more around that.
Great. So in terms of the loss rate, what I normally look at is how is our total repayment rate? So we're talking about as a total portfolio, we are at a 92%, which I think is pretty impressive, especially when you look at the type of customer we're lending to. They're in the small and medium, actually micro and small enterprises. They don't have collateral. Some of them don't even have structures like a fully fledged shop. So it could be there today, tomorrow, they possibly will not be there. So that has been exciting. One of the things we have done is to make sure that we separate how we look at the repeat users versus the new users. So of course, when a new user is coming in, the way we risk profile them, the amount of money we give to them, we're able to mitigate the risk by reducing the amount of money that we are offering them, so that we can be able to gauge their repayment ability. So in terms of how do we ensure that we restrict the defaults, especially where we don't have data sharing mechanisms, or let's say credit information sharing mechanisms? How do we work on that? So again, the good thing about the models and how we've been able to create them is the data that we get from accessing the customer's information tells us a lot. Like I mentioned earlier, in Africa, especially, SMSs are used quite widely. So you'll find a customer is probably getting reminders from other institutions. A customer is being told, hey, this is your final warning, and so on and so forth. And this is information that's readily available for us to see. So when you are able to see such data, because our algorithms are able to pick up such information, you will naturally see that this customer will be flagged as a high risk, and possibly they'll be given a waiting period before they can access, or they'll be given a very small facility. So you're talking about maybe $10 as an example. So we can actually be able to mitigate it in various ways. The good thing is now, especially when we pursue the route of being regulated, you find it opens doors to being able to participate in credit information sharing with banks, with other credit providers. The regulators allow for that. So that eventually mitigates your risk even further. And then as we enter a new market, which is another question that has come up, we normally take time. So we'll take probably 12 to 18 months to train the models. And this is where we say, we will get as much information as possible. So pretty much you'll find us lending money to as many users as we comfortably can. And then from there, learn which users will actually demonstrate a good credit behavior, which ones will not. So we haven't launched into any market for the past 3 years since COVID, but we are likely going to start again in 2024, because now things have settled down. We're now able to give it the time and energy to get into a new market.
Great. Yeah, thanks for sharing. And so one other thing I kind of, I'm thinking about as you're chatting as well is, we've talked about how, there's these kind of gender differences when it comes to accessing finance. In the past, you've mentioned how lack of collateral has kind of kept women out from being able to access finance. We know that there's also divides in terms of who has access to a smartphone, that could access these apps. So there's kind of gender digital divides that might mean more men are able to access these apps because they use smartphones and internet more than women. And so, it seems like that might mean that there would be more kind of men applying for such loans, and perhaps the algorithms would learn more from men therefore. And so curious, like how are you thinking about some of these like structural challenges in terms of, using apps and to do some of these machine learning generated credit scores? And yeah, how are you thinking about some of these kind of structural challenges and kind of the gender aspects? And maybe that's still like an open challenge, but curious about kind of how you're thinking about that, and any thoughts or lessons.
Actually, that's a very fair point, because if you look at the areas where we have more customers, it will naturally be the urban and peri-urban areas, because of some basic fundamental infrastructure. So if you look at what I normally call institutional voids, the farther away you go from the major towns, you'll find access to, say, electricity, access to internet. Maybe the road infrastructure is not as good as the urban centers. So by that in and of itself, you'll find the education level, the being able to work, and let's say the economic participation increases as you go to the urban and peri-urban. So naturally, that has given us a cohort of customers who will be one, let's say, tech savvy. They can be able to use phones. Then secondly, as you go into the towns, they can be able to afford these phones. And the fact that they have the fundamental basics in terms of education, the registration of a cell phone becomes easy for them. They're becoming more and more independent and so on. So it's sort of like a snowball effect where many things work because of how the institutions have been created around it. So how are we solving for the rest? So today, to be quite honest, we said we will focus on what we can be able to solve for, meaning today, if a person actually has access to a cell phone, because the cell phone has to be registered to an individual, no two people can use a device. It means it may, to an extent, be biased towards the men because of the affordability aspect of it. In some communities, like you'll find in Kenya, actually, true story, the Maasai community, you'll find they're very traditional, the ones who are not in the major cities, and the smartphone belongs to the man in the home. So anyone else who buys a smartphone, the SIM card will still be registered to the man. And therefore, these are things which we may not be able to solve for them as branch, but we normally follow very closely how the telcos, as well as the regulators, are working towards solving that particular need. So we don't have the silver bullet for it, but we try as much as possible to solve for the ones that can be able to get a SIM card as women, individuals, and also register on our platform.
Yeah, totally. It's there's such an opportunity in thinking about advancing financial inclusion, and there's also real structural challenges, right, and barriers. So how to kind of deal with that and walk that line and thinking about this is super interesting. And that was a really great example. Kind of as we're wrapping up here, I'm curious, what do you think is sort of the next frontier when it comes to making AI more gender smart? And then what's next for Branch? You already talked a little bit about that. So maybe more so around kind of making AI more gender smart and how if that has to do with what's next for Branch as well. Speaking a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think the next frontier will definitely heavily involve institutions such as yours, because if you're in business, you probably are just looking at how do we ensure that we're able to get as many customers as possible. We may not be consciously thinking about the biases unless someone actually makes it important for us to think about them constantly. So it's good to have such forums. It's good to have, and I've seen a lot of these type of conversations happening because of the pace at which AI is moving. And we definitely need sort of like that watchdog that says, hey, take a step back. Did you focus on this? Did you pay attention to the other? So that needs to be a constant conversation. What are we doing next as Branch? Of course, just continuing to build up on the, due to the fact that we have quite a large customer base, how many other products can we be able to offer them, but still leveraging on AI to ensure that we're not just spraying and praying products to them, but giving them financial services that meet their needs. So the use cases will still continue building up on the AI front, and then hopefully still continue to expand to other markets, because we still need, there's still a gap in financial inclusion, especially in East and Central Africa. So that's pretty much what we shall be focusing on.
Amazing. Wonderful. And I do see we have one kind of final question from Marissa, if we can try to wrap this in pretty quickly. And it's around kind of beyond the structural divides, how does different usage patterns from men and women on different devices, how might that be mitigated in the AI model? So perhaps, how do you think about how men and women might use their devices differently and make sure that doesn't result in any sort of bias? That's probably a big question to throw in at the last minute, but if you have any words to share for Marissa, that would be great.
Wow. So I think when it comes to the usage patterns, the only difference it might create, at least in our opinion, is how does it translate into financial footprint? Does it enable us to give you a better facility? Does it enable us to give you a more sophisticated facility? So I think it's not necessarily a disadvantage, because pretty much from what we've been looking at is the usage pattern is as unique as a fingerprint. So it really won't matter whether it's a lot or less. It's just how unique is it for us to be able to make a decision on it.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much. And appreciate the note before around how these types of conversations are so important as we think about what's next for gender smart AI. this is such an actively evolving space. And so how to kind of facilitate these types of conversations and working together and things like that, I think is so critical. So really appreciate you, Rose, today and joining us, and Branch and co-hosting this event as part of the Women Deliver Global Dialogues. And thank you for all of our attendees for joining as well. It was such a pleasure to be here and share this digital space with you all this morning. So I hope everyone has a fantastic rest of their day. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.